The gunshot cracked through the air like a whip, silencing the bickering merchants on Tombstone's dusty Main Street. Wilhelmina Zimmer pressed herself against the stage depot wall, clutching her small leather valise to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. Arizona Territory in 1882 was already proving more dangerous than the penny novels she devoured back in Philadelphia had led her to believe. The source of the commotion became clear as a drunken miner was wrestled to the ground by two men, one of whom wrenched the smoking revolver from his grasp. Wilhelmina exhaled shakily. She'd been in Tombstone less than 20 minutes and already witnessed gunplay. This wasn't how she'd imagined beginning her new life as Mrs. Bradley Stanton. A tall man in a weathered hat approached, dust coating his boots and the lower half of his denim trousers. "Madam," he said, nodding politely, "you look a mite lost. Can I be of assistance?" Wilhelmina straightened her travel-worn dress, trying to appear more composed than she felt. "I'm looking for Bradley Stanton's ranch. I believe it's outside of town." The man's eyebrows rose. "You'd be the mail-order bride, then," her cheeks colored. "I prefer the term correspondent's wife," she said primly. "But yes, I've come to marry Mr. Stanton." "I'm Thomas Riley, work the general store," he said with a friendly smile. "Brad's a good man. His ranch is about 8 miles northwest of here. He mentioned you'd be arriving, though." His eyes assessed her briefly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. "I reckon he'll be along shortly. He's usually in town on Thursdays for supplies." Wilhelmina nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. There was something in Mr. Riley's expression that unsettled her, as though something wasn't adding up. She tugged at her gloves, suddenly aware of how young she must look despite her efforts to appear mature. The rouge she'd applied that morning had long since faded, and her carefully pinned hair had come loose during the grueling stage-coach journey. "Would you like to wait inside the store? My wife could fix you some tea," Thomas offered. "Thank you, but I'll wait here," she replied, not wanting to miss Bradley's arrival. After Thomas departed, Wilhelmina reached into her pocket, extracting the folded photograph she'd carried across half the continent. The stern-faced man in the image was handsome in a rugged way, with a full beard and steady eyes. In his letters, Bradley Stanton had described himself as 35, a cattle rancher with modest success, looking for a sensible woman of around 30 years to share his life. Wilhelmina had responded truthfully about everything: her love of books, her cooking abilities, her desire for children, everything except her age. 20 was not 30. But desperation had driven her hand when she'd written that first letter 6 months ago. After her parents' deaths from influenza, the choices for a young woman with no family and dwindling funds had been stark: become a servant, a factory girl, or find a husband. The advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like providence. A cloud of dust at the far end of the street announced an approaching rider. Wilhelmina smoothed her skirts, heart racing as a muscular bay horse trotted toward the depot. The man astride it matched the photograph, though his beard was shot through with more gray than the image suggested. Bradley Stanton dismounted with the easy grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle, securing his horse to the hitching post before scanning the street. His eyes found hers, and for a moment, he simply stared. Wilhelmina stepped forward, clutching her valise like a shield. "Mr. Stanton, I'm Wilhelmina Zimmer." Bradley's expression shifted from surprise to confusion to something she couldn't quite read. "Miss Zimmer," he said, his voice deeper than she'd imagined. "Welcome to Tombstone." "Thank you for sending the train and stage-coach fare," she said, the words tumbling out too quickly. "The journey was quite educational. I've never traveled west of Pittsburgh before." His eyes narrowed slightly. "How old are you, Miss Zimmer?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "I, 30, she stammered, the lie bitter on her tongue. Bradley Stanton removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair. "Miss Zimmer," he said carefully, "I mean no disrespect, but I don't believe you're 30 years of age." Wilhelmina felt heat rush to her face, shame and fear mingling. She'd traveled thousands of miles, spent everything she had. There was no going back. "Mr. Stanton, the truth, please," he said, not unkindly. She swallowed hard. "I'm 20. Bradley's expression remained unreadable. "I see. I can explain," she said quickly. "After my parents died, I had few options. Your advertisement specified 30 because you wanted maturity, wisdom. I may not have the years, but I've had to grow up quickly. I can be a good wife, Mr. Stanton." "I'm hardworking, educated, Miss Zimmer," he interrupted. "You've traveled a long way based on a deception. That's not how I prefer to start a marriage." Her heart sank. "Are you saying you won't marry me?" Bradley sighed, looking around at the busy street. "I'm saying we need to talk, but not here. Let me take your bag." Before she could respond, he lifted the valise from her grasp and turned toward his horse. "Can you ride?" "A little," she admitted. "Good enough. We'll rent a horse from the livery for you. My ranch is too far to walk, and we have matters to discuss in private." The livery stable smelled of hay, leather, and horses. Bradley spoke briefly with the stable master, who brought out a gentle-looking mare for Wilhelmina. With minimal assistance, she managed to mount, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible across the side saddle. They rode in silence through Tombstone and out into the open country beyond. The vastness of the landscape was overwhelming: rocky outcroppings, saguaro cacti, and in the distance, mountains that seemed to float above the horizon. The April sun beat down mercilessly, nothing like the mild spring weather she'd left behind in Philadelphia. "It's beautiful," she ventured, unable to bear the silence any longer. Bradley glanced at her. "It's harsh. Beautiful, yes, but it'll kill you if you don't respect it." His words held a warning that extended beyond the landscape. Wilhelmina straightened her spine, determined not to show weakness. "I understand hardship, Mr. Stanton. I'm not as fragile as I might appear." This earned her a measuring look. "We'll see." After nearly an hour's ride, they crested a small rise, revealing a ranch nestled against the backdrop of rolling hills. A modest but well-maintained house stood near a barn and corral where several horses grazed. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that provided rare shade. "This is it," Bradley said. "The Diamond S. Not much compared to Eastern standards, but it's mine-free and clear." "It's lovely," Wilhelmina said sincerely. After the cramped boarding house room she'd inhabited for the past 6 months, the open space and solidity of the ranch struck her as luxurious. They approached the house, and Bradley helped her dismount, his hands strong and impersonal at her waist. A Mexican woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Senor Brad, you're back early," she called, her eyes finding Wilhelmina with open curiosity. "Elena, this is Miss Zimmer from Philadelphia," Bradley said. "She'll be staying with us for now. Can you prepare the spare room?" Elena nodded, giving Wilhelmina a warm smile. "She, of course. Come inside, senorita. You must be tired from your journey." Bradley handed the horses off to a ranch hand who appeared from the barn, then followed them into the house. The interior was simpler than Wilhelmina had expected, but clean and comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, with well-worn furniture arranged around it. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that instantly drew her eye. "Elena has been with me for 5 years," Bradley explained. "She comes in from town 3 days a week to cook and clean. Her husband Miguel helps with the cattle." Elena showed Wilhelmina to a small but neat bedroom. "Rest, señorita. I will bring water for washing." Left alone, Wilhelmina sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The reality of her situation pressed down like a physical weight. She'd lied to this man, traveled across the country to marry him, and now everything hung in the balance. When she emerged, refreshed from washing the travel dust away, she found Bradley at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. Elena had departed, leaving them alone. "We need to talk." Wilhelmina complied, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "I'm sorry for the deception," she began. "I know it was wrong, but let me speak first," Bradley interrupted. "I advertised for a wife of 30 because I wanted someone mature, someone who understood the world. This isn't Philadelphia, Miss Zimmer. Life here is demanding. My first wife wasn't prepared for it." Wilhelmina's eyes widened. "You were married before. You didn't mention that in your letters." A shadow crossed his face. For 2 years, Caroline was from Boston, came west with romantic notions of frontier life. The reality broke her. She left on the same stagecoach that likely brought you here 5 years ago. "I'm sorry," Wilhelmina said softly. Bradley shrugged, though the casualness of the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "It taught me to be more specific about what I needed in a wife, which brings us to your deception." She met his gaze steadily. "Ask me anything, Mr. Stanton. I'll answer truthfully." "Why did you lie?" "Because I needed to escape Philadelphia, and I had nowhere else to go. My parents died last year. My father was a bookkeeper, lived modestly. What little he saved went to medical bills and funeral expenses. I worked as a seamstress, but it wasn't enough. The boarding house where I lived was." She hesitated. It wasn't safe for a young woman alone. Bradley's expression softened slightly. "And no family would take you in," my mother's sister in Boston offered, "but only if I would serve as unpaid companion to her invalid husband. My father had no living relatives." "So you saw my advertisement?" Wilhelmina nodded. "I did. I read it and thought, here is a man who values wisdom and character over youth and beauty. I may not have 30 years, Mr. Stanton, but I've lived through enough to understand hardship. I didn't lie about anything else: my skills, my character, my desire for a true partnership." Bradley studied her for a long moment. "I believe you, Miss Zimmer, but that doesn't solve our dilemma." "What dilemma?" "What to do with you now." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I can't in good conscience send you back to Philadelphia if you have nowhere to go, but I also didn't agree to marry a woman of 20. Wilhelmina felt her hopes crumbling. "What do you propose?" "Stay for 2 weeks," he said after consideration. "Learn about ranch life, about Tombstone, about me. At the end of that time, we'll both decide if proceeding with the marriage makes sense." Relief flooded through her. It wasn't a rejection. "And if one of us decides against it?" "Then I'll provide you with enough money to establish yourself elsewhere, Tucson perhaps, or even San Francisco. Somewhere you can make a respectable start." The generosity of the offer stunned her. "That's more than fair, Mr. Stanton." "Bradley," he corrected. "If you're staying under my roof, even temporarily, we might as well use Christian names. Now, Elena has left supper for us. You must be hungry." The meal was simple but delicious: beef stew, cornbread, and stewed apples. They ate mostly in silence, Wilhelmina struggling to reconcile the man before her with the one she'd imagined from his letters. He was more reserved than his writing had suggested, his face weathered by sun and wind, eyes holding shadows his photograph hadn't captured. "Tell me about your ranch," she prompted, eager to learn more. 200 acres, 30 head of cattle, 6 horses. Not large by Arizona standards, but enough to make a comfortable living. I sell beef to Tombstone and the surrounding mining camps. And you manage it alone. Miguel helps with the cattle. I hire extra hands during roundup and branding season. It's enough for now, though I have plans to expand. Your letters mentioned you came west from Missouri. Bradley nodded. After the war, fought for the Union, came home to find my parents' farm in ruins. Decided to start fresh somewhere new. The war, Wilhelmina calculated quickly. That would make you 41, he supplied. Older than I let on in my letters, but not by much, she blushed. We both have our deceptions, it seems. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Indeed. Though 6 years is less dramatic than 10. After dinner, Bradley showed her his modest library, pleased when her eyes lit up at the sight of volumes by Dickens, Twain, and even Shakespeare. You're welcome to borrow anything, he offered. Thank you. Books have always been my greatest comfort. Mine as well, he admitted. There's not much society out here. Reading helps pass the winter evenings. They parted for the night with awkward formality, Wilhelmina retreating to her room with a copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer tucked under her arm. As she prepared for bed, she gazed out the window at the star-filled sky, so much more vast than the narrow slice visible from her boarding house window in Philadelphia. Whatever happened, she decided, she couldn't regret coming west. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Morning came early on the Diamond S. Wilhelmina woke to roosters crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. She dressed quickly in one of her 2-day dresses, wishing she'd had the foresight to pack more practical clothing. The fine cotton with its modest bustle was hardly suited to ranch life. In the kitchen, she found Alina preparing breakfast. Buenos dias, señorita. Did you sleep well? Very well, thank you, Wilhelmina replied, rolling up her sleeves. May I help? Alina looked surprised but pleased. You can beat the eggs. They worked together companionably, Alina teaching her how to make proper tortillas as they prepared a breakfast of eggs, beans, and bacon. Bradley entered as they finished, looking as though he'd already been up for hours. You're an early riser, he commented, seeming pleased. In Philadelphia, I had to be at the seamstress shop by 6, she explained. I'm accustomed to early mornings. Over breakfast, Bradley outlined the day. I need to check the north pasture fence line. You're welcome to come along if you'd like to see more of the ranch. Wilhelmina agreed eagerly, though she wondered how she would manage in her inappropriate clothing. Alina seemed to read her mind. I have an old riding skirt that might fit you, señorita, she offered, and a hat to protect your skin from the sun. The borrowed clothes were a blessing. The split riding skirt allowed Wilhelmina to ride properly astride rather than side saddle, and the wide-brimmed hat shielded her face from the unrelenting sun. Bradley eyed her approvingly as she mounted the same gentle mare from the day before. You look more prepared for Arizona now, he commented. The ride to the north pasture took them through stunning desert landscape. Bradley pointed out landmarks and identified plants and animals unfamiliar to her eastern eyes, javelina crossing their path, a hawk circling overhead, the dangerous beauty of a calla cactus. It's like another world, she marveled. It is, he agreed. Takes time to learn its ways, but there's a freedom here you won't find back east. They reached a section of damaged fence, and Wilhelmina watched as Bradley dismounted to repair it, his movements efficient and practiced. When he struggled to hold a post steady while hammering, she slid from her horse without being asked. I'll hold it, she offered, gripping the wooden post firmly. Bradley looked surprised but nodded. Together they worked in the morning heat, replacing broken posts and stretching new wire. By noon, Wilhelmina's hands were blistered, her face flushed with exertion, but she felt a strange pride in the completed task. You're stronger than you look, Bradley observed as they paused to drink from his canteen. I told you I wasn't fragile, she reminded him, wiping her brow. He studied her thoughtfully. So you did. Come on, there's a spot nearby where we can rest for a bit. It's too hot to ride back yet. The spot turned out to be a small spring-fed pool shaded by cottonwood trees, a verdant oasis in the dry landscape. They unsaddled the horses, allowing them to drink while Bradley spread a blanket in the shade. From his saddlebag, he produced bread, cheese, and dried apples. It's beautiful here, Wilhelmina said, sinking gratefully onto the blanket, like something from a painting. Water is precious in Arizona, Bradley replied. Where it exists, life flourishes. They ate in comfortable silence, the tension between them easing. After the meal, Bradley leaned back against a tree trunk, hat pulled low over his eyes. Tell me about your life in Philadelphia, he prompted. Your letters were informative but carefully composed. Wilhelmina smiled at his diplomatic phrasing. As were yours. I grew up comfortably enough. My father worked for a shipping company. My mother taught me household management and insisted on a proper education. I attended school until I was 17, unusual for girls in my circumstances. And after your parents died, her smile faded. I sold most of our possessions to pay debts, took a room in a boarding house and found work at Madame Lawrence's dress shop. It was respectable work but barely provided enough to live on. The boarding house was. She hesitated. The landlord had certain expectations of young women who fell behind on rent. Bradley's expression darkened. Did he harm you? No, she assured him quickly, but his intentions were clear. I knew I needed to leave before my situation became untenable. So you answered my advertisement, she nodded. Out of several in the paper, yours seemed the most honest. You didn't promise romance or riches. You wanted a partner. And that appealed to you. A practical arrangement with a stranger twice your age. Wilhelmina met his gaze. I grew up watching my parents' marriage. They respected each other, worked together, found happiness in shared goals. That seemed worth more than fleeting passion that burns out quickly. Something shifted in Bradley's expression. Wisdom indeed, he murmured. On the ride back, he pointed out the boundaries of his property, explaining his plans to purchase the adjacent land when Old Man Jenkins finally decided to sell. With the extra pasturage, I could double my herd within 3 years. Have you considered sheep instead of cattle? Wilhelmina asked. I read that they can be more profitable in certain landscapes. Bradley looked at her in surprise. You've read about ranching. I've read about many things, she replied with a slight smile. The public library was my sanctuary in Philadelphia. Sheep and cattle ranchers are typically at odds in these parts, he explained. Though you're not wrong about the profitability, the problem is water rights and grazing patterns. They discussed the economics of different livestock all the way back to the ranch, Bradley seemingly impressed by her questions and observations. When they arrived, he hesitated before dismounting. You did well today, Wilhelmina. Not many women would have helped repair fencing in this heat. She recognized the olive branch for what it was. Thank you for showing me your land. It's even more impressive than your letters suggested. That evening, Alina prepared a special dinner before departing for her home in town. Left alone, Bradley and Wilhelmina sat on the porch after their meal, watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. How did you come to be in Arizona? She asked, sipping the coffee he'd made. You mentioned Missouri, but not what brought you here specifically. Bradley was quiet for a moment. After the war, I drifted. Worked cattle drives in Texas, tried mining in Colorado, eventually found my way to Tombstone just as the silver boom was starting in '77. Used what money I'd saved to buy this land when most folks were focused on mining claims. A wise decision, it seems. Just lucky timing, he demurred. The mine strikes are already playing out. Ranching will outlast the boom. And your first wife, Caroline. Wilhelmina ventured cautiously. Bradley's expression closed off slightly. Met her in Tucson in '75. She was visiting relatives, dreamed of adventure in the West. We married quickly, too quickly. By the time she realized what ranch life entailed, it was too late. What happened? He sighed heavily. She grew to hate it here. The isolation, the work, the heat. Nothing was as she'd imagined. We argued frequently. Eventually, she received a letter from her sister in Boston offering her a way back. She took it. "I'm sorry," Wilhelmina said softly. "That must have been painful." Bradley shrugged, though the casual gesture didn't match the shadows in his eyes. "It taught me to be more careful the second time around, to be clear about expectations." "Is that why you specified 30 in your advertisement? You thought an older woman would be more resilient?" "Partly," he admitted. "Also because—" He hesitated. "Well, I'm not a young man anymore. It seemed appropriate to seek someone closer to my own age." Wilhelmina studied him in the fading light. "Age doesn't always equate to wisdom or resilience, Bradley. Some young souls are old, and some old souls have never truly lived." He turned to look at her, something new in his gaze. "That's a rather philosophical observation." "My father used to say I was born 40, she replied with a small smile. "My mother worried I didn't enjoy childhood enough." "And did you enjoy your childhood?" She considered this. "I was happy in my way. But I always preferred adults' conversations to children's games, always planning for tomorrow instead of living in today. And now I'm learning that perhaps wisdom isn't just about planning or enduring. It's also about adapting, about finding joy in unexpected places." She gestured to the magnificent sunset. "I never imagined I'd be sitting on a porch in Arizona territory, yet here I am." Bradley's expression softened. "Here you are indeed." The days fell into a rhythm. Wilhelmina rose early each morning, helping Alina with breakfast before joining Bradley for various ranch tasks. She proved a quick study, learning to feed chickens, gather eggs, and even assist with the gentler horses. Alina taught her to cook southwestern dishes, laughing at her struggles with chili peppers. "Your mouth will toughen up, señorita," Alina assured her after a particularly spicy meal left her gasping for water. On Sunday, Bradley drove them into Tombstone for church services in a wagon. Wilhelmina wore her best dress, conscious of the curious glances from townspeople. The church was small but well attended, the congregation a mix of miners, merchants, and ranching families. "That's Brad Stanton's mail-order bride," she overheard one woman whisper to another. "Younger than he specified, I hear." Wilhelmina kept her chin up, grateful when Bradley placed a protective hand at the small of her back as they found their seats. The minister preached about Ruth's loyalty and Boaz's kindness, a message that seemed particularly pointed given her circumstances. After the service, Bradley introduced her to several neighbors, including Thomas Riley and his wife from the general store. "Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Zimmer," Thomas said with a friendly smile. "I see you found your way to the Diamond S safely." "Thanks to Mr. Stanton," she replied. "Brad's one of the good ones," Mrs. Riley assured her. "You've chosen well, dear." Wilhelmina blushed, aware that their unusual arrangement was likely the subject of town gossip. "We're still becoming acquainted," she clarified gently. Bradley surprised her by adding, "Wilhelmina's giving ranch life a trial before making any permanent decisions. Smart woman." His public acknowledgement of her agency in the matter warmed her. As they walked toward the general store where Bradley needed supplies, he leaned closer. "Tombstone loves its gossip. Best to be straightforward." "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched. for not pretending our arrangement is conventional. He purchased supplies while Wilhelmina examined the fabric selection, thinking longingly of more practical clothing. Bradley noticed her interest. "Need something?" "I was just thinking my Philadelphia wardrobe isn't well suited to Arizona," she admitted. Without hesitation, he added several yards of sturdy cotton and denim to his purchases. "Alina's a fair hand with a needle, and you mentioned being a seamstress yourself." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you, Bradley." As they drove back to the ranch, Bradley pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's history: Apache raids from years past, the founding of Tombstone, the silver strike that had transformed the region. "The Earps left town last month," he mentioned. "After all that business at the OK Corral and the Vendetta ride, Tombstone got too hot for them." "I read about the shootout in the Philadelphia papers," Wilhelmina admitted. "It seemed so distant then, like something from a novel." Bradley chuckled. "Most of what gets printed back east is exaggerated. Though Tombstone has had its share of violence, that's true enough." At the ranch, they settled into a comfortable evening routine. Bradley worked on his ledgers while Wilhelmina read or sewed. Often, they discussed their books, discovering shared favorites and debating the merits of different authors. "I can't believe you prefer Dickens to Twain," Bradley said one evening, looking genuinely affronted. Wilhelmina laughed. "Dickens understands the human heart better. Twain is clever, but Dickens makes you feel." "Twain tells the truth about people," Bradley countered. "No sentimentality, just honest observation." These conversations became the highlight of her days, revealing a depth to Bradley she hadn't anticipated. Behind his practical, sometimes gruff exterior was a thoughtful man with strong opinions and unexpected knowledge. By the end of her first week, Wilhelmina realized with some surprise that she was happy at the Diamond S. The work was hard but satisfying, the landscape increasingly beautiful to her eyes, and Bradley's company unexpectedly stimulating. She found herself watching him when he wasn't aware: the competent way he handled tools, the gentleness he showed to animals, the rare but transformative smile that softened his features. On the 10th day, disaster struck. Wilhelmina was hanging laundry when she heard shouting from the corral. She rushed over to find Bradley attempting to calm a panicked young horse while Miguel worked to repair a broken fence section. "Stay back," Bradley warned as she approached. "This colt isn't broke yet." She nodded, keeping her distance but watching with concern as the horse reared and plunged, eyes rolling in fear. Bradley spoke soothingly, one hand extended, the other holding a lead rope. "Easy, boy, easy now." For a moment, it seemed the horse was calming. Then a hawk screeched overhead and the colt exploded into motion, rearing high. Bradley, still holding the rope, was pulled off balance. He fell awkwardly, and Wilhelmina heard a sickening crack followed by a sharp cry of pain. The horse bolted past Miguel, who barely jumped clear in time. Wilhelmina rushed to Bradley, who lay clutching his leg, face contorted in agony. "Don't move," she instructed, kneeling beside him. "Miguel, fetch water and clean cloths from the house." Bradley's breathing was rapid and shallow. "Lower leg. Broken, I think." Wilhelmina carefully examined the injury without moving him, noting the unnatural angle below his knee. "Can you feel your toes?" He nodded, grimacing. "Just hurts like the devil." "That's good," she assured him. "We need to get you to the house, then send for the doctor." With Miguel's help, they managed to fashion a makeshift stretcher from a blanket and 2 fence posts. The process of moving Bradley to the house was agonizing for him, though he bit back most of his cries. Once they had him settled on his bed, Wilhelmina took charge. "Miguel, ride to town for the doctor. Alina, We need to cut away his boot and pant leg to see the injury properly." Alina looked surprised at her authoritative tone but nodded, fetching scissors. Together, they carefully exposed the broken leg, revealing an angry swelling but thankfully no bone protruding through the skin. "A clean break, I think," Wilhelmina said, remembering what little she knew of such injuries. "We should immobilize it before the doctor arrives." She fashioned a splint from 2 wooden boards padded with folded cloths, binding it carefully to Bradley's leg. He watched her work through pain-hazed eyes. "Where did you learn this?" he asked between gritted teeth. "My father broke his arm when I was 15, she explained, focused on her task. "I helped the doctor. The principle is the same: keep the bone from moving until it can be properly set." When she finished, she wiped Bradley's forehead with a cool cloth. "The laudanum is in the kitchen cabinet, yes. Alina can prepare a dose to ease your pain until the doctor arrives." Bradley caught her wrist. "Thank you," he said simply, his eyes holding hers. "Rest now," she replied softly. "The doctor will be here soon." Dr. Jenkins arrived 3 hours later, by which time Bradley's pain had dulled somewhat from the laudanum. The doctor examined the splint with approval before checking the injury. "Well done, Miss Zimmer," he commented. "A proper splint indeed. The break is clean, which is fortunate, but I'll need to set it properly." Wilhelmina stayed by Bradley's side during the painful procedure, holding his hand and offering quiet encouragement. When it was done, the doctor applied a plaster cast. 6 weeks minimum," he instructed sternly. "No weight on that leg, Mr. Stanton. I know how you ranchers are, but if you want to walk properly again, you'll follow orders." After the doctor left, the reality of the situation settled over them. Bradley lay back against his pillows, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "This complicates things," he said finally. Wilhelmina understood his meaning immediately. Their 2-week trial period was nearly over, but now circumstances had changed dramatically. "Don't worry about that now," she said. "Rest. We can discuss arrangements tomorrow." That night she barely slept, her mind churning with worry and indecision. When morning came, she rose early and found Miguel in the barn. "I need you to teach me everything about running the ranch," she said without preamble. "While Bradley recovers." Miguel looked startled. "Señorita, the ranch work is no place for a woman," she finished. "Perhaps not, but it's necessary now. Bradley can direct us, but he can't do the physical work. Will you help me?" After a moment's consideration, Miguel nodded. "I will help, but it will be difficult." "I'm stronger than I look," she assured him. Wilhelmina brought Bradley breakfast in bed, settling the tray carefully across his lap. "I've spoken with Miguel," she informed him. "He's going to teach me the essential ranch operations so that things can continue while you recover." Bradley frowned. "Wilhelmina, that's not necessary. I can hire extra help from town." "With what money?" she challenged gently. "I saw your ledger, Bradley. The ranch is profitable but not flush with cash, especially with the cattle sale still weeks away." He looked away, jaw tight. "This isn't what you agreed to." "I agreed to learn about ranch life," she reminded him. "This is merely an accelerated education." "The 2 weeks are almost up," he pointed out. "You're free to make your decision about staying or going." Wilhelmina sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm not making any decisions while you're laid up. That wouldn't be fair to either of us." "I don't want your pity," he said sharply. "Good, because I'm not offering it," she replied with equal firmness. "I'm offering partnership, the very thing you advertised for. Now tell me what needs doing today and in what order." After a long moment, Bradley's expression softened. "You're a stubborn woman, Wilhelmina Zimmer." "So I've been told," she replied with a small smile. Now the cattle in the south pasture. The following weeks tested Wilhelmina's resolve and strength like nothing before. Under Miguel's guidance, she learned to ride properly, to check fence lines, to move cattle from one pasture to another. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned despite the wide-brimmed hat she wore. The dresses she'd brought from Philadelphia were soon abandoned for the practical clothing she'd sewn from the fabric Bradley purchased: split skirts, simple blouses, even a pair of modified trousers for the dirtiest work. Elena taught her to manage the household more efficiently, showing her how to preserve food for the coming winter and how to stretch supplies when trips to town were infrequent. In the evenings, exhausted but satisfied, Wilhelmina would sit with Bradley, reporting on the day's activities and receiving instructions for the next. His initial resistance to her involvement gave way to genuine appreciation and respect as she proved her capability. Though clearly frustrated by his confinement, Bradley became an effective teacher, explaining ranch operations in detail and trusting her with increasing responsibility. "You've taken to this life better than I expected," he admitted one evening as she changed the bandage on a cut she'd received while mending a barbed wire fence. "Better than I expected, too," she confessed, "though I miss our literary discussions. All I can think about lately is cattle feed and water troughs." Bradley laughed, the sound warming her more than it should. "We can remedy that. Read to me tonight. My eyes tire quickly with the laudanum." She selected Huckleberry Finn from his shelf, and they spent a pleasant hour with Twain's adventures. It became their nightly ritual work discussions over dinner, then reading aloud until one of them grew tired. 3 weeks into Bradley's recovery, a spring thunderstorm rolled through the valley. Wilhelmina was checking the chickens when the sky darkened ominously. By the time she reached the house, wind was whipping dust into blinding clouds, and lightning split the sky in jagged bursts. "The horses," Bradley said urgently when she entered. "They need to be in the barn." "Miguel brought them in before he left," she assured him. "Everything's secure." But as night fell, the storm intensified. Rain hammered against the roof and wind howled around the corners of the house. A particularly violent gust rattled the windows, and Wilhelmina heard a crash from outside. "The barn door," she realized, jumping to her feet. "It must have broken loose." "Leave it," Bradley ordered, struggling to rise. "It's too dangerous out there." "The horses will panic if water floods in," she countered, already pulling on her oilskin coat. "I'll be quick." Before he could protest further, she was out the door, staggering against the force of the wind. Rain lashed her face as she fought her way to the barn, where, as she'd feared, one of the large doors had torn free of its top hinge and was banging violently. Inside, the horses whinnied nervously. Wilhelmina grabbed a length of rope from a hook and, bracing herself against the wind, managed to secure the door temporarily. Her hands were numb with cold by the time she finished, her clothing soaked despite the oilskin. When she returned to the house, she found Bradley standing in the main room, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, his face pale with pain and worry. "You shouldn't be up," she scolded, dripping on the floor. "And you shouldn't have gone out there alone," he retorted, relief and anger mingling in his voice. "That was foolish, Wilhelmina." "The horses aren't worth your life," he interrupted forcefully. "Do you understand? Nothing on this ranch is worth that risk." The intensity of his concern startled her. "I'm fine, Bradley, just wet." "This time," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But the desert doesn't forgive carelessness. If anything happened to you—" He didn't finish the thought, but something in his expression made her heart beat faster. She moved closer, aware of water pooling at her feet. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was worried," he said, as though it were obvious. He stopped abruptly. "You what?" she prompted softly. Bradley looked at her, vulnerability plain in his eyes. I've grown accustomed to you, Wilhelmina, more than accustomed. The admission hung between them in the rain-drummed silence. Wilhelmina felt a surge of courage. I've grown more than accustomed to you as well, Bradley. His free hand reached out, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. You should change into dry clothes before you catch your death. Despite his words, neither moved, the moment stretching between them like a taut wire. Finally, Wilhelmina stepped back, suddenly aware of her sodden state. Yes, I should, and you should be off that leg. Later, dressed in dry clothing, she helped Bradley back to his bed. As she turned to leave, he caught her hand. Our 2 weeks were up long ago, he said quietly. You never gave me your decision. Wilhelmina sat beside him on the bed. I thought it was obvious. I'm staying, Bradley. As my wife. He asked, his voice carefully neutral. She met his gaze steadily. Is that still what you want? A 20-year-old wife instead of the 30-year-old you advertised for? Bradley's fingers tightened around hers. What I want is you, Wilhelmina Zimmer. Age is just a number. It's wisdom that matters, and courage and determination. You've shown more of all three in these past weeks than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. Joy bloomed in her chest. Then yes, I'll stay as your wife, if you'll still have me despite my deception. I think we've moved past that, he said with a small smile. Though it makes a remarkable story to tell our grandchildren someday how their grandmother lied about her age to snare their grandfather. Wilhelmina laughed, relief and happiness bubbling through her. I prefer to think of it as demonstrating initiative. Bradley's expression grew serious. There's something else you should know before you commit yourself. I'm not wealthy, Wilhelmina. This ranch provides a comfortable living, but we'll never be rich. The life here will always be hard work. Do you think I care about wealth? She asked. I've seen enough to know that happiness doesn't come from fine things. It comes from purpose, from building something meaningful together. His eyes softened. You truly are wise beyond your years. And you, she said, leaning closer, are not nearly as gruff and practical as you pretend to be, Bradley Stanton. Don't tell anyone, he murmured. I have a reputation to maintain. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise rather than a passion. When they parted, Wilhelmina felt a certainty she'd never experienced before. This was right. This was where she belonged. They were married 2 weeks later in Tombstone's small church, after the banns had been read the requisite number of times. Bradley, still on crutches but healing well, stood proudly beside her as she wore a simple white dress she'd made herself. Elena and Miguel stood as witnesses, along with Thomas Riley and his wife. The gossips of Tombstone had a field day with the age difference, but Wilhelmina found she didn't care. The approval that mattered had come from Bradley himself, who looked at her not as a young woman he'd settled for, but as the partner he'd been seeking all along. Their wedding night was sweetly awkward at first, both nervous despite their certainty about the marriage itself. Bradley was gentle and patient, guiding Wilhelmina through unfamiliar territory until discomfort gave way to pleasure. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt a contentment that transcended physical satisfaction, the peace of being exactly where she was meant to be. Life settled into new rhythms as spring gave way to summer. Bradley's leg healed, though he walked with a slight limp that the doctor assured them would likely fade with time. Together, they managed the ranch, Wilhelmina now a full partner in the operation rather than a novice helper. In July, they drove their cattle to market, Wilhelmina riding alongside Bradley and the hired hands. The sale brought a better price than expected, allowing them to purchase the Jenkins property Bradley had coveted. Their herd would expand the following year, their future growing more secure with each wise investment. I've been thinking, Bradley said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset. "We should build an addition to the house." "What kind of addition?" Wilhelmina asked, though she suspected his reasoning. "A nursery," he replied, his eyes meeting hers. "If you're agreeable." Her hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. "I think that's an excellent idea, though we may have less time to prepare than you imagine." Bradley's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" She nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Dr. Jenkins confirmed it yesterday. We should expect a new arrival by early spring." The joy that transformed his face was something Wilhelmina knew she would remember forever. Bradley pulled her onto his lap, heedless of propriety even though they were alone on their porch. "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer obvious. "More than pleased," he assured her, his hand resting protectively over hers on her still flat stomach. "Though now I'm doubly glad we purchased that additional land. We'll need to build a legacy for our children." "Children, already planning for more than one," she teased. "At least 3, he said firmly. "This is a big ranch. We'll need help running it someday." Wilhelmina laughed, resting her head against his shoulder. "Let's start with this one and see how we manage." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their hopes for their child and their future. The desert air cooled around them, stars appearing one by one in the vast Arizona sky. It was so different from the life Wilhelmina had imagined for herself a year earlier, yet infinitely more satisfying. "Do you ever regret coming west?" Bradley asked, seeming to follow her thoughts. "Never," she replied truthfully. "Though I do regret the deception that brought me here. I should have trusted that the right man would value wisdom over youth." Bradley kissed her temple. "And I should have known that wisdom isn't measured in years. We both had lessons to learn." "The best kind of marriage," Wilhelmina mused, "is one where both people can admit their mistakes and grow together." "Spoken like a woman of great wisdom," Bradley said with a smile in his voice. "I had an excellent teacher," she replied, turning to kiss him properly. Their son, William Thomas Stanton, was born the following March. A healthy, robust baby with his father's determined chin and his mother's thoughtful eyes. 2 years later, he was joined by a sister, Rebecca Elena. The Diamond S prospered along with the Stanton family, expanding to become one of the most successful ranches in the territory. On the morning of their 5th wedding anniversary, Bradley presented Wilhelmina with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it and see." Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with familiar handwriting. "Your letters," she realized, running her fingers over the careful script. "And yours," he confirmed. "All of our correspondence copied out together in chronological order." "I thought our children might like to read it someday, the story of how their parents found each other." Touched beyond words, Wilhelmina opened to the first page, where Bradley had inscribed a dedication. "To Wilhelmina, who taught me that wisdom comes not from years but from the heart. Thank you for having the courage to journey west on the strength of a few letters and a photograph. Our life together proves that sometimes the greatest truths can emerge from small deceptions. With all my love, Bradley." "You think they'll understand?" she asked, looking up at the man who had become the center of her world. "Our children, when they read about my lie," Bradley smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening with warmth and humor. "I think they'll understand perfectly that some journeys begin with a small step off the expected path. And I hope they'll learn what we discovered, that the truest wisdom is recognizing love when it appears, no matter how unexpected its form." Outside, the Arizona sun rose over the expanded Diamond S Ranch, illuminating the home they'd built together, a partnership founded on respect, strengthened by hardship. and sustained by a love neither had expected but both had embraced with open hearts.